Bob Dylan was 20 years old when he heard her sing for the first time. He said later in his memoir that Karen Dalton was his favorite singer in Greenwich Village. Her voice, he wrote, was like Billie Holiday's, and she played the guitar like Jimmy Reed. The comparison was not a compliment being handed out lightly. Dylan was 23 when he wrote the sentence. He had spent the intervening years being compared to everyone. He knew what the words meant. Karen Dalton had come to New York from Enid, Oklahoma, a small oil town on the plains, hours from anywhere. She was part Cherokee. She had married at 15 and had her first child at 16. She had married again and had another child, and then she had left them both behind and taken a bus east because the songs she was hearing in her head were not going to let her stay. She arrived in the village in 1960 with a 12-string acoustic guitar and a small suitcase. She was 23 years old. She had 2 missing front teeth from a childhood accident that had never been fixed because there had never been any money to fix it. She was strikingly beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with any of that. The first time she opened her mouth on a stage at Gerda's Folk City, the room stopped talking. That does not happen often in village folk clubs in 1961. The rooms are loud. The drinkers do not shut up for anybody. Karen Dalton opened her mouth, and 40 people who had been arguing about Kennedy and Cuba and rent all fell silent at the same time and stayed that way for the length of a song. This is the part of the story that has to be understood before anything else. Karen Dalton did not want to be a singer. She did not want a manager. She did not want a record contract. She did not want to be photographed for magazine profiles. She did not want to tour. She did not, in fact, want to sing for strangers at all. She preferred to sing at home for her friends, in the apartment she shared on the Bowery, in a room full of people she trusted when she felt like it. When Fred Neil, another village singer and one of her closest friends, tried to get her to sing at his gigs so audiences would hear her, she would sometimes turn her back to the crowd and sing to the wall. When Bob Dylan asked to play harmonica for her at a village show in 1961, she agreed but did not smile at him afterwards. She would leave gigs without collecting the small amount of money she was owed. The music industry did not know what to do with her. Nobody in the industry had encountered someone who could sing like that and did not want anything. Every story about a great artist in this era assumes the artist is desperate to be heard. Karen Dalton was not desperate to be heard. She was desperate to be left alone. What do you do with a voice that great when its owner does not want to give it to you? By 1969, Fred Neil had lost his patience. He was recording his own album in New York, and he made a decision on Karen's behalf that Karen would not have made for herself. He arranged for a producer named Nick Vennett to record her, and then he told her he would not be her friend anymore if she did not turn up at the studio. She turned up. She did not want to be there. The producer had to work around her mood carefully, keeping the sessions loose, letting her stop when she wanted to stop, never asking her to do more than 1 or 2 takes of a song. She refused to write original material. She said she was not a songwriter. She sang other people's songs the way she sang them at home, slowly, gently, with a rasp in her voice that sounded like it had come from a woman 30 years older than she was. The album was called It's So Hard to Tell Who's Going to Love You the Best. It came out in 1969. She hated the finished record. She thought the arrangements were too polished, the mix too clean, the whole thing too commercial for what she had actually been doing. The people who heard it did not agree with her. They thought it was one of the most quietly devastating folk records anyone had made. Almost nobody heard it. She refused to promote it. She refused to tour it. She turned down every request for interviews. The album disappeared inside 6 months. 2 years later, in 1971, someone convinced her to try again. This time, the producer was Harvey Brooks, a bassist who had worked with Dylan on the Highway 61 sessions and with Miles Davis on Bitches Brew. Brooks was patient. He was also willing to spend real money on the record. He hired a full band. He wanted the arrangements to open up. He wanted the world to finally hear what he had heard in her voice for years. The result was called In My Own Time. It is now considered a masterpiece of American folk rock. The version of When a Man Loves a Woman on it, a song that had been a huge hit for Percy Sledge 5 years earlier, is unlike any other cover of the song ever recorded. Karen slowed it down, hollowed it out, and turned it into a document of exhaustion. Every word costs her something to sing. She hated this record too, or she said she did. Some people who were close to her thought she was proud of it privately and would not say so. Either way, she refused to tour it. Again, her label, Paramount Records, gave up on her. They had done everything a record label was supposed to do. They had put money behind an artist whose talent nobody disputed, and the artist would not do the one thing artists were supposed to do in exchange, which was to stand in front of audiences and sing. In My Own Time sold poorly. Karen did not seem to care. She had been telling people for years that she did not want any of this, and now the industry finally believed her. After 1971, Karen Dalton did not release another album for the rest of her life. 22 more years, 2 full decades of a woman with one of the great American voices, deciding over and over that she preferred to sing at home. She struggled. Money was always short. She lived in cheap apartments in New York and later in the Catskills, in a small cabin near Woodstock that a friend let her use. She had substance problems that came and went and came back again. She was in and out of hospitals. Friends helped her when they could and lost track of her when they could not. The village folk scene she had known in the early 60s was gone. Fred Neil had moved to Florida and stopped recording. Dylan was somewhere else entirely, going electric, going Christian, going back and forth across the country. The clubs where Karen had sung had become Duane Reade's and vintage clothing shops. She kept singing. There are stories from the 80s of Karen turning up at a friend's apartment in the middle of the afternoon, sitting down on a couch with a borrowed guitar, singing 3 songs, and then leaving without saying goodbye. There are stories of her singing at a small folk festival in the Catskills in 1990 and being paid in cash and food. She was making the music she had always wanted to make. She was making it for the people she wanted to make it for. She was not being paid, and she was not being recorded, and she did not seem to care about either. Karen Dalton died in March 1993. She was 55 years old. She had been ill for a long time. The obituary in the New York Times was small and appeared several days after her death, and it did not get her age right. Her second album, In My Own Time, had been out of print in America for 2 decades. Her first album had been out of print for even longer. If you had wanted to hear Karen Dalton in the year of her death, you would have needed to find a used vinyl copy in a village record shop, and there were not many of those left. She left behind 2 grown children she had rarely seen since she left Oklahoma, a handful of close friends who had loved her, and a very small number of home recordings on cassette tapes in various friends' apartments across 2 states. She had made 2 albums in 30 years of adult life. She had turned down every opportunity to make more. She had been called Bob Dylan's favorite singer by Bob Dylan himself in print, and she had done nothing with the compliment. And when she died, almost nobody outside her small circle noticed. And then, very slowly, something extraordinary began to happen. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, both of Karen Dalton's albums were reissued on small independent labels. A generation of younger musicians, most of them not yet born when she had refused to tour, began to discover her. Devendra Banhart said her voice had changed the way he thought about singing. Nick Cave listed In My Own Time as one of the albums that mattered most to him. Angel Olsen and Sharon Van Etten and Julia Jacqueline and half a dozen younger female folk singers spoke about her as if she were their grandmother. In 2011, Adele told Rolling Stone that Karen Dalton was one of the singers she went back to when she needed to hear something honest. That interview reached readers who had never heard the name in their lives. Karen's records started to sell in numbers that would have shocked her label in 1971. She did not need to tour. She did not need to give interviews. She did not need to want any of it. The albums she had hated when she made them were, at last, doing what they had been quietly built to do, which was to reach the small number of people who most needed to hear that particular voice on a particular difficult night. Karen Dalton was right about herself. She was not made for the industry. She was made for the songs, and the songs, in the end, found the people. If you have never heard her, put on In My Own Time tonight. That is where this whole story lives. Subscribe. We do this every week.